So, what is the area of impact? If a data center is installed in an area, what's the area of impact?
Yeah, that's what really needs to be quantified and more transparently put forward because Bloomberg found effects up to 50 miles, most within 20 miles.
Today, we're going to be talking about the modern blight of data centers. And I'm pleased to say I have with me today a returning guest, Theodora Scarato. She is the program director for wireless and EMF for environmental health sciences. Theodora, welcome back to the EMF Remedy podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
When somebody considers what kind of environmental impacts there might be from a data center that's been placed near their home, or buying a home that's near one of these data centers, what should they be thinking about?
Yeah, there's so many things to think about, but there's the water, the land, the soil, and the air. And these environmental health issues is what we're focused on. So there's air pollution from the diesel backup generators and the burning of fossil fuel. There's water contamination for a variety of reasons, including from the heating. There's noise, which impacts our health, this low machine noise. There's forever chemical and PFAS contamination. And then there's EMFs, which I want to talk about because it's an issue that needs to get sunshine when we talk about data centers. You hear air, water, land. We need to talk about the EMFs too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everybody complains about the noise or those other factors that you mentioned. I don't hear anybody talking about the electromagnetic exposures. So let's start to get into that.
Yeah, so when AI data centers are so power hungry, you've heard that they're jacking up our electric bill. And in order to power them, we need to build power lines, new high voltage power lines, or increase the power on corridors that already exist. Plus, there's hundreds, in fact, thousands of new substations, electric substations being built in communities. So let's just start with the energy infrastructure, the grid infrastructure being built. These facilities emit electromagnetic fields, electric and magnetic fields. And there's not transparency for the community on what those levels are. I was in a meeting with a company, they have their little informational meetings, and someone raised the issue. Of course, they had to type it in the queue. Didn't get to say anything. And the company expert said, all of our levels are below those known to cause harm. And then that was the end of the story. So there's the power lines. Then there's also the harmonics and dirty electricity from these incredible machinery that is in the data centers. And there's a Bloomberg report, which I'm just trying to share all over, which talked about power quality being impacted in the areas where there are data center clusters at levels that are 20 to up to 50 miles away from the facilities. They looked all over the country. I can send you the link so you can have it with your notes on this webinar. And they had 770,000 sensors in homes near and far from data centers. And they found elevated levels clustered around the data centers. So power quality is about, contaminating the electrical supply. So here we have that happening. And then the third thing is that when these new power lines are being built, so you'll hear online people telling stories of their land being taken by eminent domain for the new high voltage transmission lines. Once you get that up there, pop those antennas on top. You see it all the time, right? Power lines with antennas on top. So now you're getting double. You're getting now the wireless radio frequency. And of course, people say, well, what's the safe limit? The question we all ask, is this safe? Well, the US government does not have any federal safety standards for extremely low frequency for magnetic fields or electric fields. They were never set. Just like with wireless, the EPA was defunded on this years ago. In fact, if you go to microwave news where, all the information is there in microwave news, you can read about the drafts that were drafted and redrafted and proposed and the controversy and then shelved. What is a safe level? Well, the federal agencies that are supposed to be doing their job did not complete the task, and there literally are no limits. Unlike the wireless, radio frequency, where we have these outdated limits by the FCC, where they adopted industry limits.
So, what does the scientific literature say with regard to the long-term safety of these power-frequent emissions, electric fields or magnetic fields?
I'm sure people have heard about childhood leukemia being associated with sleeping near close to power lines, high voltage power lines, where you're getting levels of 3 to 4 milligauss. This association has been found in study after study, in systematic reviews that have been published. And despite industry consultants who are on those papers, they just can't design it so that that's not seen in the information. So we have childhood leukemia, which has been decades of research. In fact, the WHO classified magnetic field EMF as a possible carcinogen because of that research in 2001. And the monograph came out in 2002. So then there's research on increased miscarriage. Several studies, including Kaiser Permanente, a team there, if you know about Dr. D. Kun Lee and his research, they strapped on the abdomen of pregnant women a meter to measure the levels they were exposed to daily. And they did studies to make sure, is this a typical day for the women? And then they followed their pregnancy and the children that were born, if they were born. And they found increased miscarriage. They found increased obesity. They found increased asthma in the children that were born with the higher levels of EMF during the pregnancy. Now, more research always needs to be done, but there is enough research such that hundreds of scientists, as you know, are calling to enact public health protections, mitigate the risk. What are we going to wait? We're going to just keep doing more research on, there is more than enough. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Oh, one more study that at Environmental Health News, which is the news portion of environmental health sciences, we just summarized it. There's studies on Alzheimer's and dementia. And there was a study of 3.5 million people in Switzerland, and they found elevated levels from magnetic fields being near high voltage power lines. And that was for death from dementia and Alzheimer's. And that's not the only study. There's other studies that have also found associations. So here we are.
So we've had a reason to take a precautionary approach to alternating current magnetic fields for quite a while now. What is the precautionary principle?
Yeah, well, let's talk about the precautionary principle in action, which is the framework that Europe uses, which is if there's enough studies showing harm, we don't have to wait for that to be established or proven. However, I think that the precautionary principle is not adequate for this issue because we have enough science to where we're past that. And we're at risk mitigation. We're at measures to protect public health based on a sufficient amount of science to show that the regulatory policies we have are inadequate to protect. But going back to the precautionary policy framework, which Europe uses, they allow, well, there's a variety of approaches governments have taken, but several of them have set their limit for what's acceptable at that 3 to 4 milligauss, where childhood leukemia associations are. And they, as an example, the Netherlands purchases homes that are near substations or high voltage power lines if they are going to have that level of exposure. Whereas here, We're told, don't worry about it. It's totally safe. They use the IEEE limits. Those are only for short-term acute effects of nerve stimulation and so forth. So you have 9,200 milligauss for the IEEE. You have 3 and 4, which is what several countries consider level of action. It's really astounding how behind the US is on this, and we're calling for leadership in public health protection on magnetic fields from power lines at Environmental Health Sciences.
So, what is the area of impact? If a data center is installed in an area, what's the area of impact?
Yeah, that's what really needs to be quantified and more transparently put forward, because Bloomberg found effects up to 50 miles, most within 20 miles. Here in Montgomery County, where I live, where they're looking at a moratorium, we have hearings coming up next week. There's already a zoning being proposed, which sets the data center away from people at 500 feet. Is that going to protect us 500 feet? In Virginia, which is right below me, I drive through there, they have playgrounds with data centers right next door. That's what's happening. People across the country where there's no zoning are getting them, they have their land and then they have the data centers. And these are massive, many acres large, daisy chain. I mean, it's really a land industrialization, a land grab of proportions that are mind-boggling. So I think what we need to do is put a pause on these facilities and do our due diligence. And I think that we need technology. Now, AI is a whole other thing we can talk about, and humanity and all of that, but to keep the ability to look at data and so forth needs to be done in safer ways from a mechanical point of view for all of these issues. And then we need to look at the other issues, which are huge, which the impact to society and the ethical issues and the surveillance issues and so forth. I mean, so what is a safe distance? I think that right now we need to take a pause on the whole thing.
Yeah, 50 miles around a data center, that's a considerable taking of land, to view it through that lens. I don't know how much you can have quiet enjoyment in your home. What did you say, 500 feet from a data center? Or maybe even 50 miles or 40 miles from a data center. And I think one of the great tragedies is that people are realizing too late the impacts of whether it's wireless when a cell phone tower gets sited or a small cell site, or whether it's installation of a new substation or high voltage lines or transmission lines. I think people are learning too late that there are some concerns that have been known about for long periods of time. So I like the idea of having a pause while we reconsider what we're doing and get some adequate exposure guidelines that are protective according to the data that we have of human health, especially, as you mentioned, pregnant women and young children. But one of the things that's driving all of this, I believe, and I'd like to ask you the question, is most of the data center expansion right now being driven by AI?
Yes. I mean, it's about AI, but it's not about the AI that you look up recipes or how do I say this, or this is a whole other level. This is the robot revolution. This is machine to machine communication. This is not about just the cell towers going up everywhere. The fast tracking of cell towers is not about us and our little phones, not that, which is a whole issue, the cell phones. It's not about people on their cell phones. It's about business plans. It's a business plan for their case, what they're putting together has nothing to do with your searches on your internet. However, I should add, the FCC's deregulatory agenda, how they're fast tracking cell towers near homes and schools, like I talked about with you in the last webinar.
Let's just really mention that briefly. So the FCC is the only organization in the United States government that controls these voluntary emissions of, for example, radio frequency radiation. And they're in the process of granting themselves additional rights to move more quickly in deployment. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, there are three people, and it's going to be 2 to 1, and they want to fast track, deregulate the permitting of cell towers in front of homes and schools and playgrounds and all that with stripping local city and state control. And
Nice.
they started that right around the new year, right before the new year. So they're pushing that forward. But what industry says in the letters to support this is that it's all about AI. See, it's all connected. It's all part of 6G, which is coming in 2030. It's all about connecting the AI, the data centers, having AI edge computing. If you hear industry talk and they have these conferences where you can hear all the things that they're doing, what they want is AI everywhere. So that means the cell towers themselves will have AI interfaces. That means they want it on the homes. They want to be connecting to the hyperscale data centers. And by the way, this is about fiber optic. They want to put their lines in everywhere and make them bigger. And they don't want people to say, well, I don't know if I want you to dig right there. No, we want to preempt that too. So they're putting out this stuff, they're putting out proposals, I should say, on preempting around laying the cable, laying the fiber optic, because you got to have that if you're going to put in AI data centers, and it's all the same animal. And it's all for corporate profit, not for our needs. No one's thinking that's not part of the priority here, and it should be.
So you mentioned corporate profit. So in the name of corporate profit, we've seen lead, we've seen mercury, we've seen asbestos, we've seen fine particulate matter in the air, all categorized, ionizing radiation, all categorized. And we once had them in abundance in certain places. As no known safe level of exposure, particularly for children. And yet we don't have yet that same acknowledgement for forces when there is an abundance of data. One thing we didn't talk about is the legitimacy of studies and how scientists are funded.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that there are at least, well, there's, when somebody is an industry-friendly researcher, they come up with industry-friendly results more often. And the independence, where does independent science even get funded these days? So these are all some questions I'll just throw in the mix. And we were talking about AI, and I don't want to get into a discussion about the virtue or benefits and potential downsides of AI, because I could talk about that for weeks. All I want to say about AI is it is the fundamental thing that's driving this expansion. And so I want to make just one point, which is the growth for AI is absolutely unlimited. The expansion that's being imagined, as you've alluded to, within industry and also in our private lives, so we can look up recipes and whatnot. But it's literally, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, it's unconstrained growth potential in the future. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I mean, I see our data, the data, that our personal data is like a harvest. It's like a crop that can be harvested over and over again and not in our control. I mean, just looking at us alone, what we do online and all of that, that's all being used, not to mention all the other uses. So this is hard to even imagine, but it's happening. The companies are imagining it. They're planning, they're imagining, and they're preparing. And we're back here going, wait, you want to put that power line in my backyard? So yeah, it's so important to get involved on this issue because like we're looking into if we were going to move, now that the kids are out, where do we go next and where do we go? Because you got your cell towers and now the data centers are going in everywhere and we just need to get a handle on this. So I'm really thankful you're opening up awareness on this and doing this important work because it's going to affect people also that are sensitive, or I don't even like to use the word sensitive because we're all sensitive, right? All our cells are sensitive, but this is the issue to get on board and to do something to protect yourself and your community.
Yeah, I had a great interview just a little while ago with Andrew Marino, who, of course, was working in Robert Becker's lab for a number of years and then went on to have his own very successful career. And so he did some experiments that showed that we're all affected.
Yes.
And so we can talk about people who are sensitive, in other words, have not been habituated to these exposures, and they still have an awareness, so they can have an avoidance reaction that'll keep them away from some of these toxic exposures. But what I see over and over again in my work is people find out too late that there are these emissions. None of them have really been proven in any kind of realistic way to be without harm because of our current situation with how exposure guidelines are made. So I wonder how quickly that's going to happen. We are creating more and more uninhabitable places. And from my perspective as an EMF consultant, so when you have a cell phone tower placed or small cells or whatever, people are beginning to come around to understanding. But these data centers and the impacts potentially reaching 50 miles from them, I just don't know that people have a real good understanding of what that means. And it isn't that a good EMF consultant can't come in and reduce exposures within a home. That can happen. But the question is, can you reduce all of the exposures to pristine levels? And that's becoming more and more difficult to do. My question, as you just alluded to, where can people go? Where can people go to avoid this new threat of the electromagnetic implications of data centers being placed in our communities? Do you have any questions or suggestions as to things that could be asked by maybe a planning board or county commissioners or whatnot, questions that they could ask with regard to siting these structures? And then we can talk about possibly places to go, and maybe terrain might be the only help there. But go ahead, your thoughts on that question.
That's interesting. Terrain, of course, that'll stop the centers from going in. Well, so the first, it's just like with 5G and small cells. Does your community have an ordinance, or what are the rules in your locality as well as your state related to data centers? That's the first thing. Because one of the things that's happening is if you don't have one, the companies are like, oh, perfect, we'll go there. There's no rule I can't, right? That's our situation here. We don't have a data center specific. They're using other rules, which are zoning, which does not really apply to this kind of industrial facility. So the first thing you want to find out is, what are my local ordinance, and then how can I get a better one in place? And you organize in your community on that. There are several organizations doing great work on this, recommending local ordinances and what should be in there. And I've been thankful to be a part of some of that work. In fact, EMF is even mentioned in some of these proposals. So I do recommend the Pennsylvania Sierra Club is doing some incredible work on that and putting forward recommended ordinances. You can go to our website at ehsciences.org. We have a section on data centers, health and environmental effects, and at the bottom of that, we have links to a lot of these websites where you can learn more. And everything's kind of it's kind of like it's happening as we're flying. So there's just so much going on in terms of policy. So that's the first thing. Find out what's happening, get connected with the local people working on it to make sure that is happening. But I think that going back to what you said about lead and mercury and asbestos, there's a synergistic effect of all of those chemical toxins or actual agents, toxic agents, and this exposure of energized fields. And that needs to be looked at because we're elevating air pollution, water pollution, and now adding, and the noise, which, by the way, is really a serious health issue, noise alone. And there's the synergistic effects. Then there's the lack of measurement. There is not measurements happening that are adequate for the kind of exposures from, let's start with noise. You have noise you can hear, audible noise, but then there's inaudible noise and ultrasonic. Now, some animals can hear it, not all. I mean, but that can still affect your health. There's the tonal noise. The industry comes in with their little meter. They're not measuring all the kinds of sound frequencies that are being emitted from these facilities. Same with the dirty electricity and the harmonics. they're not using, they're not going to those higher harmonics. They're not measuring that typically. Although I have to tell you, the the company, the industry groups, the consultants are talking about this because it's affecting the machinery. And they're developing meters in order to look at those higher harmonics to have an industry standard kind of way to measure it. But if you're living near a data center and you want to know that, they're not going to give you that information. They don't go around with meters on that. So we need to have transparency. It's like the biggest thing is measuring, reporting estimated levels and transparency as to what those are. That's like the first thing to talk about. You don't need to even go into like, is it going to hurt me? I'm sure it is. Just start with transparency, honestly, because I want to see what the numbers are. What are the EMF levels going to be? What's the harmonics going to be? What's the noise going to be? And I don't want just your little meter. I want to know those higher frequencies too. The air pollution, all of that needs to be. Oh, and what one thing that the companies are doing is talking about one thing at a time. Like, oh, this facility will have it, but they're not talking about the fact that they're daisy chaining these facilities together. So you're getting, several large complexes together, and any one diesel generator will do X amount of air pollution, but we're talking about dozens of them altogether. So just to take that metaphor for all the other things that are happening, it's important to know that, and we need to be understanding what is the cumulative effect, not just the one thing at a time. So transparency on that before you're even near it being permitted. Those numbers that can be in the ordinance, that all that information needs to be pulled together and presented, and then talk about how there are no regulations for EMF for the magnetic fields alone.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Thank you. Do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to share? And I'm going to make sure that we give your contact information. And I have a few comments I want to make at the end here. But any other thoughts you want to share?
be sure to sign up for our newsletter. The Environmental Health Sciences has a wireless and EMF program newsletter. Please join our newsletter to stay updated with the latest science and news on this issue. The second thing is that there are federal proposals moving forward, not just on towers, but on the permitting of data centers, on the allowance of chemicals that are used in data centers by the EPA. There's all these federal things happening, which are important to know about and important to share with your federal officials, as well as your state ones and local ones. But every person has a role to play here. So yeah, and we have all, if you want to know where the science is, we have it all study after study highlighted in our resources online. So stay tuned for that.
All right. And I just want to make some comments at the end here. So we talked about where are people going to go if they're living in an area and a data center has been put in and they've realized now that the electromagnetic environment and maybe the sound and noise and all those other issues that we talked about make it uninhabitable for them, for their family. So where do they go to avoid this long term? And this is getting much more challenging because typically the way those people who still have a functioning immune system that warns them about electromagnetic exposures, they have one of two strategies. They can just run, and go to a place that has no people. And usually they're in good shape there. The other thing is the effective use of terrain to shield them from radio frequency radiation. And that's going to have fewer people because less people are willing to live in the rugged mountains. But that strategy now of just running, and going to a desolate place might not work because data centers, all they needed really is certain logistics like fiber optic, and they can have the power brought in. So the only thing I think we have remaining is the effective use of terrain and looking also for lower population. Probably want to live somewhere where there is no fiber and won't be for years. And that's not going to be happy news for people. That's not going to be, oh, joy. Yeah, I've always been wanting to live in such a place. But the calling that I have is to try to help people manage day to day and how to live in places that are not harmful from an electromagnetic exposure perspective. Those are a couple of my comments about this. And then I'll just reiterate this: the demand for AI is unbounded. So we really need to get on top of this right away, because we haven't seen anything yet with regard to the proliferation of what can be happening. How can people get in touch with your work?
Yes, Environmental Health Sciences, ehsciences.org. You can also contact me at Theodora at ehsciences.org. And if you want a presentation in your community or want to, meet with officials on this, just please contact us. So we are really wanting to elevate this issue to protect people and the environment. And thank you for spreading the word, Keith. on
Theodora,
this.
you've been an incredible help. I really appreciate the work that you've done, and not only the work that you've done in this area of electromagnetic exposures and bringing awareness, but your passion for it. So I really appreciate the work that you do. Thank you for being here again today.
Thank you so much.